In 2017, pregnant teacher Laura Wallen disappeared after sending a cryptic text. Her boyfriend made a tearful plea for her return, but days later her body was found buried in a field. What really happened to Laura Wallen? Stay tuned as we uncover the truth, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more true crime stories. Laura Wallen was a 31-year-old high school teacher from Olney, Maryland. She had a vibrant personality, known for being compassionate and dedicated to her students. Laura taught history and social studies at Wild Lake High School in Columbia, Maryland. Colleagues described her as someone who genuinely cared about her students, going the extra mile to help them succeed, both academically and personally. She was the kind of teacher who stayed after school to tutor students who needed extra help and worked hard to make her classroom a welcoming space. Her impact on her students was clear. Many looked up to her, and she had built strong relationships with both them and her colleagues. Laura was known for her upbeat and positive energy, often described as having a big smile and a caring heart. Outside of work, Laura was close with her family. Her parents, Mark and Gwen Wallen, often spoke of her warmth and love for others. She had a close-knit group of friends who were supportive, and she was someone who easily connected with people. In the summer of 2017, Laura had even more reason to be excited. She was 4 months pregnant, eagerly anticipating the birth of her first child. She often shared her excitement about becoming a mother with her friends and family. Her social media posts and conversations reflected how much she was looking forward to the future. She had already started planning for her new life as a mom, shopping for baby items and thinking about what her life would look like after the baby's arrival. The news of her pregnancy was a source of joy for her, and those around her were excited for her new chapter. However, Laura's personal life wasn't without complications. She was in a relationship with Tyler Tessier, a man who would later become the center of the investigation into her disappearance. Laura and Tyler had been dating on and off for several years. On the surface, their relationship seemed typical, but as investigators would later reveal, it was far more complex. Tyler Tessier was not only Laura's boyfriend, but also the father of her unborn child. Their relationship had its ups and downs, with some of Laura's friends expressing concerns about it. Despite this, Laura was committed to making things work, especially with the baby on the way. She had hope for their future together as a family. And in the months leading up to her disappearance, she believed that Tyler would step up as a father and partner. What she didn't know was that Tyler had been leading a double life. He had been involved with multiple women, keeping his other relationships hidden from Laura. On September 4, 2017, Laura was scheduled to teach her first class of the year, but she never showed up. This was immediately unusual, as Laura was known for being reliable and punctual. When she didn't appear, it raised red flags among her colleagues. Wild Lake High School administration reached out to her family, asking if they had heard from her or knew where she was. Her family had also been concerned. Laura hadn't been responding to calls or messages, something that was out of character for her. The day before her disappearance on September 3rd, Laura had spent time with her family during the Labor Day weekend. According to her parents, she seemed happy and excited, showing no signs of distress. She had shared her plans for the upcoming school year and talked about her pregnancy with excitement. She was preparing to be a mother and had recently been shopping for baby supplies. After spending time with her family, she left to meet Tyler Tessier, her boyfriend and the father of her unborn child. On the morning of September 4th, shortly after she was last seen, Laura's family received a strange text message from her phone. The message was unsettling and cryptic. It said that she was having doubts about the baby's father and was considering whether she should continue with the pregnancy. This message was highly unusual for Laura. Her family knew how excited she had been about the baby, and she had never expressed any serious concerns about her relationship or pregnancy before. The sudden change in her tone worried her parents, and they began to suspect that something was wrong. They tried calling and texting her multiple times, but their efforts were unsuccessful. Laura had gone silent. As hours turned into a day, her family became increasingly alarmed. After realizing that no one had heard from Laura, they reported her missing to the Montgomery County Police Department on September 5, 2017. The disappearance of a pregnant woman, especially one as responsible and grounded as Laura, prompted immediate concern. Friends and family quickly organized search efforts, posting on social media and distributing flyers in hopes of finding her. Law enforcement began their investigation by retracing Laura's steps in the days leading up to her disappearance. They interviewed her family, friends, and colleagues to try to determine if there had been any signs of trouble. Her relationship with Tyler Tessier became a focal point early on in the investigation. He was the last person known to have seen Laura, and investigators were interested in learning more about their relationship dynamics. The police also began searching the areas where Laura had last been seen. They reviewed her phone records, hoping to find clues in her communications. The cryptic text message she had sent to her family was a key piece of evidence, raising questions about who had actually sent it. Her family began to suspect that someone else may have been using her phone, as the message did not sound like something Laura would say. Tyler Tessier, Laura Wallen's boyfriend, quickly became a key figure in the investigation into her disappearance. Tessier, a 32-year-old man from Damascus, Maryland, had been in an on-again, off-again relationship with Laura for several years. At the time of her disappearance, he was the father of her unborn child, and the two had been working through their relationship as they prepared for parenthood. From the outside, their relationship appeared typical, two people expecting a baby with hopes of building a future together. However, as investigators dug deeper, it became clear that the relationship was much more complicated than it seemed. Those close to Laura had expressed concerns about Tessier. Friends and family noted that the couple had experienced numerous ups and downs over the years. While Laura was deeply committed to making their relationship work, especially after becoming pregnant, Tessier appeared less invested. He often seemed unreliable and distant, creating strain between the two. Despite these tensions, Laura remained optimistic, believing that the impending birth of their child would strengthen their bond and help them overcome their differences. She continued to express excitement about the baby, which made the events surrounding her disappearance all the more concerning. As news of Laura's disappearance spread, Tessier became actively involved in the search efforts. In the days following her disappearance, he worked alongside Laura's family, distributing flyers and cooperating with police as they searched for her. He attended family-organized events, participated in search parties, and seemed genuinely distressed over her sudden vanishing. On the surface, Tessier appeared to be a supportive partner, determined to help find Laura and bring her home safely. One of the most notable moments during this time came when Tessier stood alongside Laura's parents at a press conference on September 11, 2017. The Wallen family had decided to hold a press briefing to make a public plea for Laura's safe return, hoping that media attention would help generate new leads. Tessier, despite being under police scrutiny, was invited to join them, and his presence became a focal point of the event. At the press conference, Tessier appeared emotional and distraught, speaking to reporters in a calm but tearful tone. He made a direct plea to Laura, saying, "If somebody has her, please understand that you've taken away a huge person in so many people's lives. We just want her back. It doesn't matter what the circumstances are, just bring her back." Tessier even spoke about the baby they were expecting, adding that Laura's disappearance was a nightmare for everyone involved. His words and demeanor seemed heartfelt, and for many watching, it was difficult not to empathize with his apparent grief. However, behind the scenes, investigators were becoming increasingly suspicious of Tessier's behavior. While he publicly displayed concern, police had already uncovered inconsistencies in his statements. They discovered that Tessier had been living a double life. In addition to his relationship with Laura, he had been involved with multiple women, some of whom were unaware of each other's existence. Tessier had been lying to both Laura and these other women, managing to keep his affairs secret. This deception, coupled with his strange behavior following Laura's disappearance, raised red flags for investigators. Police were particularly interested in Tessier's involvement in the search efforts and his willingness to participate in the press conference, a move they believed was calculated to divert suspicion away from him. His emotional plea for Laura's return, while compelling, was later seen as an attempt to maintain the appearance of innocence. From the outset, investigators noticed inconsistencies in Tessier's statements. When asked about the events leading up to Laura's disappearance, Tessier provided conflicting details about his last interactions with her. He initially told police that he had seen Laura on September 2, 2017, when they spent time together at his family's property. However, when detectives pressed him on specifics, such as where they had gone and what they had done, his story started to shift. Tessier struggled to maintain a consistent narrative, which raised alarm bells for investigators. Meanwhile, law enforcement focused on gathering physical and digital evidence to build a clearer picture of what had happened. One of the first key pieces of evidence came from Laura's cell phone records. Investigators analyzed the data from her phone, tracing her movements and communications in the days leading up to her disappearance. These records provided critical information, helping to establish a timeline and locate the last known position of her phone. Tessier's own cell phone records became a crucial part of the investigation. Detectives were able to track his phone's location during the critical time window when Laura went missing. This led them to a rural area in Damascus, Maryland, where Tessier had spent time with Laura on the weekend of her disappearance. Specifically, the phone data placed Tessier near the location where Laura's body would eventually be found. This discovery strengthened law enforcement's suspicions and shifted the focus more heavily onto Tessier as the primary suspect. As police continued to question Tessier, his story unraveled further. He provided contradictory explanations about his whereabouts and actions during the time Laura went missing. At one point, he claimed that Laura had been feeling anxious and had wanted time alone to think, suggesting she might have run off voluntarily. This explanation did not align with what friends and family knew about Laura's mindset. They were adamant that she had been excited about her pregnancy and looking forward to becoming a mother, making it highly unlikely that she would simply disappear. In addition to his inconsistent statements, investigators uncovered even more troubling information about Tessier's personal life. It soon became clear that he had been leading a double life. Tessier had been romantically involved with several women during his relationship with Laura, and none of them were aware of each other. Some of these relationships had continued up until the time of Laura's disappearance, raising serious questions about Tessier's motives. The most concerning detail for police was that Laura, unaware of his other relationships, had been looking forward to building a life with Tessier and their unborn child. However, detectives uncovered evidence that Tessier was deeply conflicted about the pregnancy. He had confided in friends that he was unsure about becoming a father and was worried that Laura's pregnancy would complicate his life. This internal conflict, coupled with the pressure of juggling multiple relationships, seemed to be pushing Tessier into a corner. Investigators began to suspect that these factors could have played a role in his decision to harm Laura. Law enforcement also uncovered additional evidence that suggested Tessier had planned Laura's murder. His behavior in the days following her disappearance became more erratic, and as police dug deeper, they found discrepancies in his alibi. Surveillance footage, cell phone records, and witness statements all began to contradict his claims. Detectives learned that Tessier had been using multiple phones to communicate with the women he was involved with, further complicating the investigation. On September 13, 2017, a week after Laura Wallen was reported missing, law enforcement made a tragic discovery. Following leads from the investigation, including cell phone data and information gathered from interviews, police were directed to a remote field in Damascus, Maryland. This area was familiar to Tyler Tessier, Laura's boyfriend. and it soon became clear that this location would be a critical piece in solving the mystery of her disappearance. The field, located in a secluded rural area, was part of a large property where Tessier had spent time in the past. Investigators had already established that Tessier's cell phone had been in the vicinity of this area around the time of Laura's disappearance. As police searched the site, they found a disturbing and heartbreaking scene: Laura's body buried in a shallow grave. The grave, hastily dug, was located in a spot that indicated Tessier had tried to conceal her body quickly, hoping it wouldn't be found. Laura was still wearing the clothes she had last been seen in, and her remains had begun to show the effects of being exposed to the elements for several days. It was immediately clear to law enforcement that this was a murder. Upon examining Laura's body, investigators found that she had been shot in the back of the head, execution style. This detail added a chilling element to the crime, suggesting that her killer had not acted in the heat of the moment, but had instead made a deliberate decision to end her life. The condition of the grave and the manner of her death indicated that the burial was done in a rush, likely shortly after she was killed. The discovery of Laura's body confirmed what her family, friends, and investigators had feared. She had not disappeared voluntarily, but had been the victim of a brutal and premeditated murder. Her body was found exactly 1 week after she was last seen alive, and the timeline matched the evidence that had been gathered over the course of the investigation. The location of her grave, combined with cell phone records and other physical evidence, placed Tessier at the scene during the time of her death. The news of Laura's death devastated her family and the community that had been holding out hope for her safe return. Her family, who had been actively searching and pleading for information, now had to face the reality that Laura was gone. The discovery of her body marked the end of the search, but also solidified Tyler Tessier as the prime suspect in her murder. The investigation now shifted from finding Laura to ensuring justice was served for the crime that had been committed against her. The tragic discovery of Laura Wallen's body, buried in a shallow grave in a field, brought a devastating conclusion to the search efforts, but it also provided the key piece of evidence law enforcement needed to hold her killer accountable. On September 13, 2017, the same day Laura Wallen's body was discovered, police moved quickly to arrest Tyler Tessier. The evidence against him had been mounting for days, and the discovery of Laura's body provided law enforcement with the final piece they needed to formally charge him. Tessier was taken into custody without incident and was immediately charged with first-degree murder, among other related charges. The decision to charge Tessier with first-degree murder indicated that police believed the crime had been premeditated. The methodical way in which the murder had been carried out, Laura was shot execution-style in the back of the head, and the effort to conceal her body in a shallow grave pointed to careful planning rather than a spontaneous act. Tessier's actions in the days following Laura's disappearance, including his participation in the press conference and search efforts, further supported the theory that he had tried to cover his tracks after committing the crime. Police had built a strong case against Tessier, using both digital and physical evidence. One of the key pieces was the cell phone data that placed Tessier near the location where Laura's body was eventually found. His phone had pinged cell towers in the Damascus area on the night Laura went missing, and the timing of these pings aligned with the estimated time of her death. Additionally, inconsistencies in Tessier's statements during police interviews had raised red flags early on in the investigation. He had changed his story multiple times, and detectives quickly realized that his alibi didn't hold up under scrutiny. Surveillance footage also played a role in piecing together the timeline of events. Tessier had been caught on camera visiting stores and making purchases in the days following Laura's disappearance, behavior that seemed unusual for someone supposedly distressed over a missing loved one. These purchases were later connected to items found at the scene where Laura's body was buried, further linking him to the crime. As word of Tessier's arrest spread, the public reaction was swift. Laura Wallen's family, who had stood by Tessier during the early days of the investigation, were devastated by the news. They had invited him into their home and allowed him to stand beside them at the press conference, unaware that he was likely responsible for Laura's disappearance. Learning that the man they had trusted and supported was now the prime suspect in their daughter's murder was a heartbreaking revelation for them. The community at large was also shocked by the arrest. Laura Wallen had been a beloved teacher, and her disappearance had drawn widespread attention and concern. Many had followed the search efforts closely, hoping for her safe return. When the truth about Tessier's involvement came to light, it sent shockwaves through the community. People who had seen him plead for Laura's return on television were now grappling with the reality that he had likely been lying the entire time. Despite the overwhelming evidence against him, Tessier continued to maintain his innocence in the days following his arrest. However, the strength of the case built by law enforcement left little doubt about his guilt. The digital footprint he left behind, the physical evidence recovered from the scene, and his increasingly erratic behavior made it clear that Tessier had played a central role in the tragic death of Laura Wallen. For Laura's family and friends, Tessier's arrest marked a critical step toward justice. While nothing could undo the devastating loss of Laura, holding her killer accountable provided a small measure of closure. The charges against Tessier ensured that he would face consequences for the horrific crime he had committed, and the community rallied around Laura's family, offering support in their time of grief. After his arrest in September 2017, Tyler Tessier was held in custody while awaiting trial for the first-degree murder of Laura Wallen. In the months leading up to the trial, Tessier remained in jail under tight security, with authorities monitoring his behavior closely. During this time, Tessier continued to proclaim his innocence, though the overwhelming evidence against him suggested otherwise. He was scheduled to stand trial for Laura's murder, and the prosecution was preparing a strong case based on digital evidence, physical findings, and the inconsistencies in his statements. However, in a shocking turn of events on September 6, 2018, just days before his trial was set to begin, Tyler Tessier was found dead in his jail cell. He had taken his own life by hanging himself with a bedsheet. His suicide came as a surprise to both law enforcement officials and Laura Wallen's family. Despite being on suicide watch at certain points during his incarceration, Tessier had not shown any recent signs of self-harm leading up to his death. The timing of the suicide so close to his trial raised questions about his mental state and whether he feared facing the overwhelming evidence that would be presented in court. Tessier's suicide immediately halted the legal proceedings, effectively preventing the case from ever being heard in front of a jury. With his death, the opportunity for a courtroom resolution was lost. For Laura Wallen's family, Tessier's suicide left a profound sense of frustration and grief. While they had hoped to see justice served in court, with Tessier held accountable for his actions, his death denied them that closure. They were deprived of hearing him answer for his crime, and the full weight of the evidence would never be examined in a public trial. For many, the lack of a courtroom verdict felt like an incomplete ending to an already tragic case. The impact of Tessier's suicide on the legal case was significant. With his death, the criminal proceedings against him were effectively closed, and there would be no trial, no conviction, and no formal sentencing. While law enforcement had gathered substantial evidence proving Tessier's guilt, his suicide meant that the legal system would never render a judgment on the case. It also meant that Tessier never fully confessed to the crime, leaving some unanswered questions about the precise details of Laura's murder. For the Wallen family and the community, the lack of a trial was particularly painful. A public trial would have allowed the family to confront Tessier and to hear the full story of what happened to Laura in a legal setting. Instead, Tessier's death left many lingering emotions. as his suicide was seen by some as an escape from the consequences of his actions. The case became an example of how, in some instances, justice may never be fully realized, leaving those affected to cope with an unresolved sense of loss. Thanks for watching. If you found this story informative and want to hear more in-depth true crime cases, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. We've got more content coming your way soon.